Last year, negotiations for a new gaming compact between Pewaukee Pueblo and the state of New Mexico broke down. A judge dismissed a subsequent lawsuit by the Pueblo, and so Pewaukee officials have asked the federal government to approve a new compact that cuts the state oversight out of the equation and stops revenue sharing as well. Both sides accuse each other of negotiating in bad faith. The Pueblo's proposal would drop all state restrictions, but Governor George Rivera said, contrary to earlier media reports, the tribe would keep certain rules, such as the ban on cashing benefit checks at the casino. But Pewaukee does want to let gamblers drink while they play, and they want to let quote-unquote qualified gamblers sign IOUs. We'll get into that in a second. Pewaukee is one of the 5 tribes whose gaming compacts expire next year. The others are still in ongoing negotiations with the state. And Dan, Pueblo officials say, you know, the revenue sharing bid is one thing, and you know, everybody kind of gets it that revenue is flat. People are broke. We just came out of this recession. People are not going to the casino as much. But is this the way to raise more revenue, by letting down a lot of barriers that people say are for the public's own protection when you go to casinos?
But I don't think they really exist, like
in practical, as a practical matter.
Okay. I mean, okay, so they can't walk up to you playing at the table and offer you a drink. You can get up from the table, go get your drink, pour it in a cup, and walk back to the table.
Right.
So I mean, it's kind of a lot of rules or a wink and a nod. I'm going to start off by saying George Rivera is one of the sharpest Pueblo leaders in the state of New Mexico, if not the nation. So I mean, picking a fight with Governor Rivera, not a smart move. I will also say, though, on the flip side, all the stuff, I was there when we did gaming in the legislature, all of this stuff, all the rules, all the regulations include the state. I mean, you're literally going to have to rewrite the federal law to say we want the states out, and only you look at everything. And I don't think the feds are going to say we want to start negotiating one-on-one with every Pueblo or tribe or nation in every city of every state in the nation, and they're not going to start in New Mexico. So I think there's going to have to be a compromise. But I think what George Rivera is really good at is I think he's done a great job drawing a line in the sand, and I'll bet he's going to wind up getting a lot more of what he wants out of the deal than he would have gotten had he sat at the table and done it the old-fashioned way.
Interesting point there, and I appreciate your point about the history of this, because, Laura, if you think back to when Governor Johnson was in power, this is all coming about, Pewaukee was one of the 2 Pueblos that were like, look, we think the deal kind of stinks, actually. You know what I mean? They didn't sign it until like 4 years later. So this is not an unusual stance, it would seem to be, from Pewaukee. You know?
Well, there's been a long history, I think, at least going back a decade, with Pewaukee having issues with the state. So it's not necessarily just this administration. I mean, it's gone back quite a bit. But one of the things I wanted to just mention in terms of the feds negotiating with a tribe, my understanding is that they don't, you know, the tribes can't sort of apply for that, petition the Department of Interior to do that until their state compact is up. So it's at the time that they renew. But there is that potential that once you sort of open the, you know, the gate for one Pueblo, others may follow suit if they can get a better deal with the feds than they do with the state. At that point, then the Indian Gaming Rights Act would apply. And they have a different sort of set of rules, but they still have to comply with certain state rules that are for public safety and so forth. And I think one of the issues that, at least in the plan as I read it, and was, not that I read the full plan, but what was in the newspaper, you know, bringing down the gambling age, I think for some people, you know, is a concern. The issue of alcohol at tables and so forth, but also, you know, the issue of having IOUs, I think just from a practical perspective, you know, problem gambling, people who don't have the means to actually be there and signing IOUs can really be a slippery slope, just in terms of solvency for the casino. So I think, you know, in some ways, the way I read it, it could be just a negotiating tactic. They want to start with, you know, some pretty high demands and then sort of roll that back. And I hope that's the case, because some of these, I think, most people would have a problem with. What I'm also concerned about is the 1,500 employees potentially being laid off. Again, possibly a, you know, a tactic, and probably a very savvy one, but there is the potential for layoffs. And anytime you're changing, you know, you're renegotiating your compact and you're looking at higher costs of doing business. So I think they're probably hedging their bets a little bit in terms of negotiation, but, you know, it is, I think that Dan's absolutely right in terms of drawing a line in the sand.
And it's a tough deal. I know we're going to
Sure, please.
Sorry, but you know, Pewaukee is also got to remember, Governor Rivera's also got to remember, they've lost a major advocate that had unbelievable power for them in Ben Lujan. I mean, the Speaker of the House used to represent Pewaukee. Now it's a fairly new legislator that's representing Pewaukee, and I'm not sure that stroke exists in the legislature that existed when Ben Lujan was there as the Speaker of the House.
It certainly is a vacuum.
Yeah, it's a bit of nuance there. Touching the IOUs for a second.
I just wanted to say before that it's not that 1,500 employees would be laid off, it's that some of the 1,500 who work there would be. Just that I also was alarmed when I read it. I went back and reread that sentence in the same way.
Okay,
yeah, exactly right. The IOU thing that Laura brought up, that's the one bullet point in this that really gives a big pause. Because if you really want to get someone in trouble purposely, that's a great way to do it, is have them sign IOUs.
But
I don't get that.
Some of these issues, I think, really are casino management and business management decisions that I'm not sure I want the state to have a say in. You know, the way that Governor Rivera explained it in that follow-up story where he talked a little bit more about some of the EBT card and that, you know, he said, we're doing this, we're not going to give IOUs to people who can't afford them.
I think it's a red herring. I mean,
how does one determine that?
They do.
You know,
Adrienne, have you ever applied for a line of credit at a casino? I have.
Never. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You got to send bank information. You got to fill out paperwork. Wow. It's worse than getting a mortgage. It's worse than getting a credit card. They pull your credit. They do everything. I think what they're wanting to do is, because of where they're situated, it's fairly difficult in today's economy and the way the laws are now to have somebody get on a plane in New York with $25,000 cash in a bag and fly out to Pewaukee to gamble. But that same person that has that wherewithal can go in, fill out that paperwork, get a $100,000 line of credit, and go out there and spend a week playing golf, enjoying the sights, gambling, doing the things that they can afford. This is a business. Pewaukee is not looking. I don't believe for a minute that Governor Rivera or anybody at Pewaukee is looking to exploit the poorest people in their community and get them on lines of credit.
But isn't that a collateral damage of the thing? Tom, I'm going to get you in here. Collateral damage of, you know, I understand your point, but folks are gambling and there's drinking involved. And it just doesn't.
It's like Blazing Saddles. I can't believe there's gambling in this.
Right, there you go. You know, does it help their case? Does it hurt their case? I know that it's a whole other matter altogether.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the public perception, and then there's the negotiation, and how public perception influences that negotiation. And it's clear that Pewaukee Pueblo is, because nobody else, remember, during the last legislative session, Navajo Nation wanted to negotiate, and then several other Pueblos. With this making front page, you're not really hearing a whole lot from the other, from the folks who were up in arms earlier.
That's right.
So they're out there testing the waters. Everybody else is watching, but I think we need to separate the perception from the negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think the tone of the statements that are coming out of the governor's office really tell us a lot about the attitude of the governor's office here. You know, you've got, of the governor of New Mexico, I'm sorry, thank you. That, you've got her spokesman Enrique Neal saying that Pewaukee is being reckless and unreasonable. And, it's the governor of New Mexico's office that's saying, well, this is pitting the tribes against each other. Not one leader of one other tribe has come out and said, hey, George, we don't want you to do this.
That's right.
You know, I will say this, I know we got to move on, but I'll say this, what was interesting during gaming was you'd have the negotiations during gaming, and they'd all come together, the tribes would come together, the Pueblos and everybody, and then you'd start talking to them, and someone would say something, you'd see someone step back, and they go to another room, and they go to another room, and it was a constant moment of getting something consensus and then not letting people peel off. And you had Pewaukee and Mescalero that were like, yeah, we're not in on this. And then, now I think those other guys have gone silent because they're all sitting back saying, maybe the feds are a better way to go. And the state, Jay, I'm going to finish by telling you this, the state better be careful because the feds are looking for money. The federal government is in a deficit of money just like the states are. Yeah. And if the feds can see an opportunity to bring in millions of dollars from a state like New Mexico, tens of millions of dollars, don't think they won't seize that opportunity.
Interesting point there. Coming up, will marijuana decriminalization make it to the ballot here?